Hello everyone, I hope you enjoy this loose, moody winter watercolor landscape. I shared a painting similar to this on Instagram, and many of you reached out wanting a tutorial on it. So I hope that you enjoy. It's perfect for beginners or experienced artists, and it's just fun to play around, and this is the perfect painting to do so. Materials I'm using: Arches cold press watercolor paper. I got this pad in Europe. I cannot find it in the US, so if someone knows where I can get one, let me know in the comments below. I love the size. Now, all of the materials that I show will be listed in the description below, so please see the description for all of the links to all the materials that I'm using. And I'm also using an acrylic board here, and I like this because I'm able to put my paper on it and lift it off of my surface. Now I spray the actual board and then I spray the back of my paper, and you'll see here all the droplets about how much water that I'm actually using. And that's just going to seal the back of that paper onto that surface. Yes, you can tape your paper. I do sometimes, but honestly, for most of my paintings, most of my professional paintings, I very rarely tape my paper. I really like to wet the back and then wet that, seal it to the surface that I'm using or the board that I'm using. It just keeps your paper wet for longer, and I just personally like it. Now I use a lot of water in my paintings, so it does flatten out, but do whatever feels best to you. Now I'm using the wet on wet technique here, and I've wetted the whole base of my paper, and the colors of choice are only two colors. I've used Daniel Smith Payne's Gray and Burnt Umber. It's going to give you a very beautiful gray. You can have a more warm gray or a cool gray depending on how much of the Payne's Gray you use versus the Burnt Umber that you use. Now I'm just going ahead and placing the paint wherever I see fit. It's really just how I'm feeling. I very rarely sketch out my paintings. I just go for it. And that is just a type of painter that I am. I feel a bit more free. I feel that I can be a bit more creative than sketching it out. But of course, if you find that you are more of a sketcher, by all means do that. I know that sometimes sketching can be extremely useful and helpful. And sometimes I do wish that I have sketched something out before, because I sometimes have to redo my paintings, but do whatever works best for you. Once you're happy with that first layer of your sky, go ahead and dry it. Now my paper is not fully dry. You can see here, there's definitely some wetness to the paper, but the surface is dry enough to where I can place more water over the top of it, which you'll see me doing here, because this is where I'm going to lay down the trees, and I want it to be wet so the trees or the paint can spread out. Now this is a really great exercise, especially for beginners, because it's going to force you to practice wetting over your paper that you've already painted on. And that can be a little scary because you might mess up the paint below it, but it's a really great skill so you can add more layers to your painting. So I think it's a really great practice. But anyway, you can see that I've wetted that area, and I am just taking darker pigment and just moving it around, trying to create a land formation, if you will, in the background of what I want to see. Now for the base of this background, I want that bottom part to be darker. You'll also see that I'll add a bit more brown, and then sometimes I'll add a bit more blue. Because it's wet, it's just going to bleed together, and it's going to work beautifully, and it's going to create dimension. Now I'm going to continue doing this throughout the painting. Because of the wet on wet technique, the paint dries lighter because you just have more water in your brush, in your paint, and on your paper. So I'm going to continue doing that. Now you'll also notice in the upper left-hand corner that paint is just a bit too hard. There's no wet areas, so it will dry harder. If you don't like that, which I didn't, just go ahead and mist your paper, and it's going to feather out. You'll also notice that there is a bit of a line from the water in the upper above the trees. I will go ahead and fix that later, but if you leave it like that, it will dry like that. But hey, it kind of looks like a distant mountain, so I like it, but I did not leave it. I'm also grabbing more paint and starting to form more land just to get more dimension in my painting. Now that bottom part of the paper is dry, so nothing is moving. Wherever I place that paint, it's staying there. And I wanted that for this. And yeah, just go ahead and play around and works best, and what works best for you in your painting. You can continuously mist your paper, not too closely, because then you might, have the paint kind of splatter everywhere, but just to keep it wet, so like you see me doing here. And then, of course, I continue to add just more paint because it's just continuing to get softer. So, which is beautiful, but I definitely want some richness to my painting, especially as we create some mist. I don't want it to completely just disappear and be, just this, random bits of soft paint everywhere. If you're after more of an evergreen or a forest, go ahead and just draw some lines or paint in some lines. Those are naturally going to feather out and become softer. So now we're going to tackle that line. And you can see it's still beautiful, but I didn't want to leave it. And it's a great way to practice. I'm removing some of the paint that's splattered onto my surface. So you just grab some water and you bring it up. Now I am bringing it all the way up to the edge of my paper. That way there's no way that there's any lines, because I definitely do not want a line in my sky. But again, it's a great practice, and you can see it didn't disturb the sky and the line is gone. So now I am doing something very controversial. I love using white paint in my watercolor. You may not like that. You may been advised to not use it. I say do you. I say experiment and see if you like it. I personally love it. If you look at the base of the edge of the midground, you'll see that the white has pushed up into the land. Now, if this was like a very snowy field, it could almost be wisp of branches. I don't know. I love using white. I like the creaminess. I like what it does. Depending on the paint that you use, it can really just spread into that paint and create a crystal effect, an icy effect. I love it. I use it. But again, if you don't want to, you don't have to use white in your watercolor paintings. Now, to create a bit more of the mist, I'm just mushing. There's got to be a better word. What's a better word than mushing? Squishing? I don't know. I'm messing up the paint to create some, moving the paint around, if you will, to create some of that misty effect. Now, grabbing my scraper tool, I'm using the side of my brush or the side of my scraper, and I am just forcing the paint away. It's hard to describe this technique. You just have to experience it for yourself, and you may not get it right away. I know I certainly didn't, because it's a very fine balance of how much paint and water is on your paper. You need enough paint on your paper, but it can't be too wet. If it's too wet, then the paint just pulls right back into where you scraped. And if it's too dry, then you're not able to move that paint around. So it's really a fine balance. If you find that you've scraped too much, like I did here, I just go over it with some more paint. Now, it doesn't always work, and especially if you are just starting this out, that if you scrape it too hard, you might find that when you add more paint, it doesn't sit and blend as well as it did before. But again, it really boils down to practice. There's no magic trick here. You just have to sit down and paint and scrape away. So if you don't want to do the lifting technique, a beautiful way to get mist is with a paper towel. But here's the trick. I highly recommend experimenting with a dry paper towel and a wet paper towel. Not a sopping wet paper towel, but a paper towel that you lightly mist. Because if you use a slightly damp paper towel, it's going to gently lift the paint. It's not going to have harsh lines, where if you use a dry paper towel, you are lifting a ton of that paint and the water. But a more wet paper towel it's just going to gently move it, and a little bit of water will disperse right back into the painting. But I think it has a beautiful lifting technique. Anyway, try it. You'll see what I'm talking about. Just try it. Now I'm continuing to add a bit more darkness to my painting because, again, I want the contrast and I want to have more of the darkness focused on the bottom part of the land. And since that area is wet, I can go back in with a little bit of water and I can pull that paint down and get a really beautiful, soft, snowy effect. Again, I don't know what this white area is. It could be a frozen lake. It could be snow. It's really up to you, but I think it's beautiful. I think there's dimension here, and I think it's extremely achievable. And I know that you can do this, especially if you're just starting out. And the techniques that I'm using in this painting are really great to play around with. And, for me, this is a very loose watercolor painting. You're kind of just letting the paint flow and do its thing with a little bit more techniques going on in here with the scraping for the rocks and, of course, lifting for mist. But I think there's some really useful techniques in here that you may want to incorporate in your watercolor paintings. Now I'm going ahead and drying this again, but I'm not drying it completely. And I'll show you here in a moment, but the reason I don't want it to be completely dry is, one, if I do, that paper is going to curl up. Now, of course, if you tape your paper, it won't do that, but I want it to be ever so slightly damp, and you can see here that sheen is telling me that it's still a little bit wet. But the reason I want to do that and to leave it a little bit wet is because when I grab my bleed proof white or gouache or whatever you want to use, it really doesn't matter. I just personally like the bleed proof white. I'm going to add my snow, but because it's ever so slightly wet, it's going to soften. It's going to almost melt a little bit and become a bit softer, and I will just continue to build it up. I like that more diffused look, that softer look. I think it's very, I don't know, to me, it just adds a bit more drama. Now you can do this with a little bit of water, but the water may end up giving you just a bit more dramatic effect that you may not be after. You'll have to experiment with both. Now, if you have too much white on there, like I did here, I just go ahead and dab it with a paper towel, and then I sprinkle in some more of the snow. To get the snow effect the way you want it, you have to experiment with how much water is in your pigment. So again, it's just another thing of playing around and figuring out what is going to work best for you and the effects you're after in your own painting. And you can continue to add more snow or leave it. I've left it. I'm happy. I've grabbed a bit more of that bleed proof white, a little bit more of a dry brush here, less water on my brush, to go over my rocks just to add a bit more dimension. The more snow that you add, you can lose your painting a little bit. But if you're after more of the snowstorm effect, if you will, then I think it's really perfect. Especially, with these paintings, you might want to look at them far away, right? Sometimes if you get too close to a painting, you lose it a little bit. But that's kind of the effects that we've done here, and I think it's a beautiful painting. I think it turned out really well, and I'm so excited to share this video with you. I hope that you really enjoyed it. Of course, be sure to like and subscribe and leave me comments below. I love reading your comments, and I get to them as fast as I can. But anyway, all right, my friends, well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and take care. I'll see you soon.